Kang the Conqueror is now out in Marvel Snap, and it is the most controversial card release in the game's history. In this video, we're going to be looking at the best decks for Kang, the nuanced features of how this card works, such as how it resets snaps, and I'm just going to overall share my thoughts, feelings, and opinions on the card. Big shout out to Marvel Snap Zone for this fantastic article, which will be in the description. Kang is 6,000 tokens, and it's going to permanently stay in Series 5 alongside Thanos and Galactus as a big bad. So it's a very expensive card for players to get hold of, and therefore if it's a very powerful card, it's going to be quite a gap between the newer players and the more experienced players which have more resources. It's 5 energy, 0 stats, and on reveal you look at what your opponent did, then restart the turn without Kang. There's so much to unpack with how this card works, but the basic idea is you play Kang, you see what your opponent did, then the turn restarts. Okay, that's pretty good, that little bit of information, somewhat comparable to Daredevil, and this article actually covers that. Is it just a more expensive Daredevil? Well, the answer is no. Daredevil is showing you what your opponent does, and their decision is locked in, and then you can then counteract that. Kang, on the other hand, is good for information, but actually the most powerful aspect of Kang is not necessarily information, but it's how it interacts with the snap mechanic in particular. Because let's say I play Kang on turn number 6 and I snap, my opponent might fold and then I just win the game, right? They might retreat. Similarly, if my opponent presses the retreat later button on turn 6, which a lot of more experienced players will use, if they think they're losing, but if both players retreat on turn 6, the game ends in a tie. Well, if I'm playing Kang, but I think I'm still losing the game, my opponent thinks they're also losing the game. Let's say they missed their Silver Surfer, like their big payoff card. They might retreat as well, and I would just win the game because my Kang was played on turn 6, I didn't retreat, and he didn't reveal, so the round wasn't reset, the turn wasn't reset. So it turns those tied games, which are quite rare on turn 6, into victories. So that's quite powerful. The information is quite powerful. However, the snap interaction is the most powerful thing. Because when you play Kang, if you snap the same turn as you play him, the snap also gets reset. In other words, you should always snap the turn you play Kang, which is a little bit of a problem because that is somewhat of a bluff, right? You're bluffing that you have the nuts and that your opponent might concede, and you just kind of cheat out some victories. So every time you play Kang, you're incentivized to snap the turn you play him, because when he reveals, that snap will be taken back. And what that snap is doing is just giving your opponent the opportunity to concede, basically, and retreat. What that does is it just fundamentally breaks, to some extent, how the snap mechanic is working in the game, because suddenly, every time your opponent snaps on turn 5 or turn 6, you have to think, oh goodness, do they have Kang? And that is a little bit of a problem, right? Because it kind of is just going to have an impact on every single game of Marvel Snap, where you're now always wondering, oh my goodness, is my opponent bluffing me? And it's just Kang, right? So that's an issue, I think. The other thing that's very powerful about Kang is because the turn resets, you also draw a card at the start of the turn. So you play Kang, and then the turn resets. Let's say you play him on turn 6. It goes back to the start of turn 6, you draw a card. You're always going to draw the same card which you already had. But just imagine you draw Kang on turn 6, you play Kang, and then you draw Kang again, and then you play Kang again, it would break the game. So that doesn't happen. Instead, if you play Kang the turn you draw him, you just draw the next card in your deck. What this means is Kang is turning your deck into an 11-card deck. It is free deck thinning, which is incredibly powerful. The only thinning card in Marvel Snap right now is Angel, Adam Warlock to some extent, and America Chavez does to a little bit early game. She gives you better odds of drawing cards like Deadpool, Elektra early on, but ultimately she is still always being drawn and actually decreasing the odds of you drawing a specific card throughout the game. So she has huge downside while also having upside. Kang, on the other hand, doesn't really seem like he has much of a downside at all. The only downside would be is that in games where you play him on turns you don't draw him, he is just like a wasted card, and you're going to be drawing one less card. But in other games, he's literally the opposite and is turning your deck into an 11-card deck. So particularly in decks like Electro, where you only really play one card per turn, Kang is just going to be on auto-include in those styles of decks. But yeah, particularly those turns where you play Kang and the turn you draw him, he is just incredibly overpowered because he's Resetting the snap, meaning you might just get a free win by your opponent retreating. He is thinning your deck completely, as if he just was never even there, and you're also getting information over what your opponent's best play was that turn. So the card is unbelievably powerful. There's some other things as well which are very interesting with Kang, which is instances of RNG will stay the same. Now what I mean by that is on turn 6, if I was to play the Reality Stone and Kang, and the Reality Stone changes the location to Sokovia, for example, well, the turn resets and I get my Reality Stone back, Kang disappears. If I play that Reality Stone into the same location, it will be Sokovia again. So little elements like that of RNG are going to basically stay the same. So what I would also imagine if I was playing Kang and, for example, Gambit in the same turn, the card which Gambit randomly kills will be the same. Now, of course, one issue with that is it's very difficult to play Kang and other cards in the same turn. The Reality Stone is one example because it only costs 1 energy. You could do this with Mr. Negative, though, where Kang would be a very cheap card to play. It would cost you nothing. He won't get 5 stats because he is going to disappear from the board and the game, right? But it would just allow you to do maybe some RNG things, like see what your Silver Surfer buffs, for example. Of course, that also means your opponent has the opportunity to concede, so I don't think it's particularly good in Mr. Negative, but it's still an interesting part of his ability nonetheless. But certainly the most powerful 2 things about Kang are the fact that he can thin the deck for free, and moreover, his interaction with the snap mechanic. Is he a more expensive Daredevil? Well, we've kind of answered that question. No, he's very different fundamentally. Daredevil, of course, a great card giving you information on turn 5, but your opponent's plays are locked in. He's not interacting with the snap mechanic in a particularly broken way. There are some people critical of how you can snap on a Daredevil turn and then your opponent doesn't have too long to decide if they want to stay or not, but I don't have an issue with Daredevil. Kang, on the other hand, with the snap mechanic, is just fundamentally unhealthy, I do believe, and could be very problematic if this card becomes an auto-include card. It could break the game. Now, one of the most obvious uses for Kang is going to be in Galactus decks. Because on that turn 5, you want to play Galactus, your opponent might play an Aero or a Cosmo to counter your Galactus, and Kang is going to reveal that that is the case. Of course, you just make sure not to play Kang into the lane you would Galactus, so you don't accidentally get Cosmoed, because that is one of the only ways Kang can get countered. Of course, you can also snap on that turn, and then your opponent might just retreat anyway, and you might get a free win. And then if not, you play your Kang, you see if they've got the Aero or the Cosmo, and instead of playing Galactus, you make a different play entirely to try and still win the game. For example, you might play a Dr. Octopus, maybe a Spider-Man, something like that. So Galactus, a very obvious one for him. Also Electro, as I mentioned, a deck where you just want to be playing 1 card or so per turn. Seems like a really good fit for Kang. But there's a lot of other places Kang just makes sense in. For example, Lockjaw decks. If you thin your Kang off of Lockjaw, he is never actually entering your hand and is going to be removed from the game. Therefore, in a Lockjaw deck, he is also free deck thinning. So that is quite a problem, I think. Lockjaw already very popular right now, particularly with Thanos. So that means that probably the best deck in the game right now, which is Thanos, or maybe it's Shuri, but Thanos is certainly one of the best 2 decks, just got better, because I think Kang is just going to be auto-include in any Lockjaw deck, because as I say, if you thin the Kang out of your Lockjaw, it just turns your deck into an 11-card deck, or a 16-card deck in the case of Thanos. Okay, so what is the cost of running the card? This is like a really interesting thing, because there is a slight downside of Kang, right? Where he is, in most situations, going to be just 1 less card that you're going to have access to in your hand. Apart from the turns, the games where you draw him on turn 5 and turn 6 and then get to draw another card. So there's definitely decks where you're not going to want to run Kang. He's not just going to be an auto-include card in every single deck. For example, if you're just playing a kind of like generic, let's say a Leech deck, like the traditional Leech deck with Leader and Aero, of course Leader got nerfed, where you do want to be playing a card on turn 1, turn 2, Kang is just giving you less options, right? A Silver Surfer deck, for example, it's giving you less 3-drop cards to play. Mr. Negative, I don't think you'd want to play it in either, as I mentioned, because actually you're giving your opponent maybe too much information. Perhaps you do end up still playing him there. But there's definitely, he's not an auto-include in every single deck, but there's just so many decks where you would want to play him, and many very good decks. Galactus, Electro, Thanos. These are some of the best decks in the game right now. Would you play him in Shuri? Perhaps, because in a Shuri deck, you might just be really scared that your opponent's got that counterplay on turn number 6, that Shang-Chi, and he's going to be giving you a lot of information in that regard as well. So decks which can get heavily countered, you might just also want to play him. The other really interesting use for Kang is because of his potential consistency, where you get to draw an extra card. You basically turn your deck into an 11-card deck. He is a perfect fit in Hazmat decks, in particular Gambit as well. I posted a Gambit video yesterday. These decks are really all just about drawing all the combo pieces. You don't really care about too much. In this deck, for example, you just want to draw Luke Cage, you want to draw Hazmat, you want to draw Wong. Their version doesn't have Wong. You want to draw Odin, you want to draw Debris. There's just a few cards that's all you need to draw, and then you kind of win the game. So you play Magic for that exact reason, to draw one extra card. But then you can also just add Kang into the mix as well, because if you draw Kang on turn 5, you play him on turn 5, bang, you draw an extra card. So he's also a perfect fit in these kinds of games. So yeah, all on reveal effects are going to be reset, all play cards, all random effects, but we also just have that little bit of extra information. If you replay cards with random effects, they also resolve with the same outcome on the repeated turn. You can copy Kang with Moon Girl, and then you'll be able to play the card twice. Each Kang is considered a separate instance, so Kang does not remove Kang 2. So that just sounds like a bit of a meme, but you can potentially double Kang. I don't think that is really offering too much, to be completely honest. I guess what you could do is you could play the first Kang, your opponent expects the next Kang, and then you just don't play it, maybe. A little bit of mind games in there, I suppose. But yeah, I don't think that sounds too powerful overall. But my thoughts on Kang. Wow, I think this card is going to probably prove to be a problem. The more we hear about this card and the way it interacts with the snap mechanic in particular, I think makes this a very, very scary card, which of course Kang deserves to be very scary. But in Marvel Snap, where there's no factions, there's no different decks which you can just build cards from. There's just one card pool which you can put a card in any deck. It does seem like it might be a little bit game breaking, and one I'm quite concerned about. I know this is a card which, if I get, I'm going to struggle to not put it in any deck. Interestingly, one thing I will point out, it does have some anti-synergy with America Chavez, currently my favorite card in the game, because you do want to draw Kang on turn 6 and play Kang on turn 6, whereas Chavez is, of course, eliminating that fact, because the thinning aspect of Kang is definitely another strength of his. So it does have some anti-synergy with Chavez, which is a very, very good card. So that's one thing which is bad about him, as well as the fact that in most situations when you play Kang, you are just going to have one less card in your hand than you otherwise would. But I think a lot of decks in Marvel Snap kind of don't care that much about that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give it a like if you did. Shout out to Marvel Snap Zone for the article. And I'm looking forward to checking out Kang again. Lockjaw decks, Thanos Lockjaw, Hazmat combos, pretty much anything, honestly. I struggle to see how this guy is not just going to be auto-include. Let me know what you think. See you on the next one. Bye.